This week we'll take a look at critical analysis of literary terms. But before we do that, I'd like for you to take notice that as we are finalizing the semester, I'm trying to make a very steadfast attempt to make a bridge between the content that you're learning in this coursework for integrated reading and writing, and then also with the coursework that you will go forward to take, which is your English 1301. Your next course after mine is progressively going to be English 1301. Depending upon how well you do at the reading TSI test, will decide whether or not you need to take the last level of reading or whether or not you are finished and you'll move forward with reading level coursework, which is going to be history, government, and science. So pretty much the discussions we'll have today and be able to evaluate simple, compound, complex, as well as compound, complex sentences, as well as literary terms that we'll use for your last essay that you will write with me. All of these are going to be connected with content that will be discussed in English 1301, and I'd like to be able to prepare you at this point. So first, let's talk about 4 different types of sentence structures. The first is simple sentence. This is normally the easiest. It consists of one independent clause, and I always know it's usually a simple sentence because it normally lacks punctuation inside of the sentence. So let's look at the examples we have here. They are expecting many opportunities for the future. I have plans for the future and want to realize them all. As you can see, neither one of these examples have punctuation. Let me make it very clear. The second example here, it does use a fanboys word. Remember, fanboys is for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And that's a coordinating conjunction word that's often used with a comma to separate 2 independent thoughts. Now, what does a simple sentence say that it is? It consists of one independent clause. So the second example, it does have a fanboys word in the sentence, but the second part after the word and, it is not an independent thought. It cannot stand all by itself. So the entire sentence itself is an independent thought. So remember, simple sentence lacks punctuation inside of the sentence. The second type is a compound sentence. I usually remember that a compound sentence consists of 2 or more independent clauses, which is joined together. And what's the best way that we, as students, know how to join 2 independent thoughts together? That's using that fanboys word, okay, with a comma in front of it, or you can use a semicolon. So let's look at the examples we have here. Natasha and Christy wanted to stay in a fancy hotel, but they didn't have enough money. So everything before the comma is an independent clause, and everything after the comma is an independent clause, and it was brought together by the fanboys word. Example number 2, Natasha and Christy went to Mexico on vacation. They used their savings to pay for the trip. This would have been a run-on sentence had the author not used a semicolon to separate these 2 independent thoughts. So remember, compound sentence, you'll see with a fanboys word and a comma, or you'll see it with a semicolon. A third type of sentence structure is a complex sentence. This is composed of one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. A dependent clause begins with either a subordinating conjunction word or a relative pronoun. So a relative pronoun, you're looking for the words such as that, which, who, whom, or whose. Usually students see a relative pronoun if they use the word which or that. Those are the most common. So let's look at the examples we have here. Because I registered early, I got the classes I wanted. The word because in example number 1 is a subordinating conjunction word. That should tell you as a reader that the sentence is starting out with a dependent clause, it will require a comma, and then go on to an independent thought. So this makes it a complex sentence. Example 2. We decided to skip dinner last night, which was a really bad idea. Again, this is a complex sentence because it uses a relative pronoun. It uses a relative pronoun, which, and it's got a comma in front of it. The last type of sentence structure example here is a compound complex sentence. Now, please do not always assume that all really long sentences are going to be composed of at least two independent clauses. Not all long sentences are going to be compound complex sentences. Just because it's a really long sentence doesn't mean that it meets the rules of a compound complex sentence. So what makes it a compound complex sentence is that it has to have at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. So let me go into the examples. Because I started my report early, I handed it in on time, but many students had trouble meeting the deadline. So again, we see this word because, which is a subordinating conjunction, and it goes all the way until the word early, and it's cut off with a comma. So that should tell you, remember, that it's a dependent clause, so we've met one of the requirements of a compound complex sentence. Then it goes on to say, I handed it in on time, but many students had trouble meeting the deadline. Now when you use a fanboys word with a comma, remember you're separating two independent thoughts. So that meets the other requirement of a compound complex sentence. So this is a good example. Another example says, because I started my report early, I handed it in on time. However, many students had trouble meeting the deadline. Very similar. Starts out with a dependent clause, goes on to an independent clause, which is separated with a semicolon by the second independent clause. So let's go into some examples. Let's be able to practice our ability to identify which type of sentence structure we're looking at. All right? So remember, it can be simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences. So here it is. Because I love jazz, I spend much of my time at jazz clubs. If you guessed a complex sentence, then you would be accurate. Now remember, a simple sentence does not have any punctuation, and there's a comma in here, so we know that's not it. A compound sentence uses a fanboys word, and then it also, or it has a semicolon. And I don't see a fanboys word, and neither do I see a semicolon. And in the very last option, the compound complex, I do not have at least two independent clauses. So the only option left, a viable option, is the complex. In the cookbook, the recipe calls for 3 eggs, which seems like a lot for this dish. So we know off the bat this is not a simple sentence. I'm not quite sure if it's a compound sentence because I don't see a fanboys word with a comma, and neither do I see a semicolon. So we can rule that one out also. Let's look at the hardest sentence here, which is the compound complex sentences. What are the rules for that? Remember, you have to have at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. So let's break apart the sentence. In the cookbook, that's a dependent clause. The recipe calls for 3 eggs. That's an independent clause. And the last part says, which seems like a lot for this dish. That's a dependent clause. So we did not meet the rule for 2 independent clauses because we only had 1. So there's no way that it can be a compound complex sentence. Our only answer that's left is that it's a complex sentence. So within your MySkills lab this week, you are going to address all of these 4 types of sentences. And what you'll do is you will identify the type of sentence. You'll take the term either simple, compound, complex, or compound complex, and you will drag that on top of the sentence to be able to use your identification skills of what type of sentence it is. Make sure you accomplish that this week because you only have until April 30th. As we progress on, and as I've already noted to you, I'm trying to make that bridge between your 1301 class. Something that is going to be very important in English 1301 is that you're going to write different types of essays, but you're also going to have to evaluate and read different types of literature, and you're going to have to use different types of terms that go along with these different types of stories. Usually English 1301 uses short stories. They're easily able to be probed. You can use different types of literary terms to be able to investigate. And the reason that we as English instructors do this is take a look at the image that we have here. And I always tell students this type of analogy because I want students to kind of gain a visual in their head. So let's imagine that this is the sea of information and meaning. Many students, very similar to this person that is snorkeling on top of the water, many a times people will just graze the surface. They'll just read the words exactly for what they mean. And really, honestly, as a college level student, as a student that is able to evaluate and analyze, you have to go deeper than that. And so you as a college level student, as you are becoming more versed and a stronger reader and writer, you have to do what this other person is doing, and you have to get into the trenches, go underneath the water and into the information and the meaning. Dig around to see what's going on. Use the key terms that I'm going to give you here in a moment for you to investigate. Use these pieces to break apart a short story and be able to gain a deeper understanding of really what is going on in these types of short stories that are given by the authors. This is so instrumental because what will happen is you're going to use these pieces, use this information to go into English 1301, and you will actually be at a very strong advantage to be able to break apart this information. So this leads into what you need to be able to do. Within this lesson, I've given a Microsoft Word document, and it's called Notes About Literary Terms. And you need to be able to take notes on this document and submit it for a grade. So you're responsible to research the following literary terms: theme, protagonist and antagonist, tone and diction, symbolism, dramatic irony, and foreshadowing. As you're researching these terms, I really want you to understand and make your own little notes. Explain how would you identify this information when you're reading a short story. And then write about this information in an essay. So you're not going to create an essay just yet. I'm wanting you to, let go of the surface of the information. Let's dive into these terms to really truly understand what they mean, because you will see them in English 1301, and you may as well become very versed and prepared to see this. So go ahead and take care of this assignment and submit for a grade.